Hello everyone and welcome to another Brad Teaches video. This time we're looking at the lesson 3.5 project, and this is the Oregon Trail project. So normally I kind of start by giving the requirements of the project, but today I'm just going ahead and dive on in. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my main game loop, and for my main game loop I'm going to use two variables. One is going to be called game status, and this is going to be basically the status that I would use to check if the game's done or if the user is won. Either way, it kind of just checks and sees if the user has done something or if there's a condition in the game that is complete. And I'm also going to check user command. And I want both these conditions to be in the negative. That's what they're going to be looking for. And the while loop, of course, is going to continue until one of those commands is different, or in some cases, both of them could potentially be different. So here we are saying while game status is not equal to game over and user command is not equal to quit, I'm going to go ahead and instantiate those in the very beginning just to be a kind of generic, obviously blank slate. So user command is equal to nothing, right? So we have both of those that are blank. User command is especially important to be blank because we don't want to give any predetermined thing for the user that we might accidentally interpret later. So in the game status, there's a lot that we could do. And I think I'm going to start with the different functions, right? There's a lot of different ways that you could start with this, but I kind of struggled when I was building the project. And when I sat down and really tried to figure out how I would want to design it, I kind of designed it from a top level using all of these commands, right? So the commands that the prompt gives us are starting with travel, right? So when the user says that they want to travel, we're going to actually do something. We're going to write it as a function, right? And the functions, the way that I'm going to write them is like so. So anytime that the user picks something, my function is basically going to be handle and then whatever that keyword is. So in this case, it'll be handle travel. Some of our other commands, as I'm reading them off, are rest, hunt, status, help, and quit. And all these things are going to have their own different functions, right? So here, if I go back, I'm going to say else if the user command is equal to rest. And I want to actually give it quotation marks. I want to do something, and I'm going to call this handle rest, right? So let me copy this, and you'll start to see the way that we're laying this out corresponds in the same way for pretty much every single option the user can take. So here I'm going to copy hunt. I'm going to say right here, one of our commands is also status. So this will allow the user to check and see how they're doing. I'm going to do help, and I'm also going to do quit. And then of course I also need to change these functions so they actually have the same name. Now, of course, we're creating the names, or I should say the calls for these functions, but these don't actually create the functions, right? We need to have a def, and then we need to actually say what the function is and say what it does earlier on in our code, which we're going to get to. But for now, I'm just declaring it so you can see like from a top level kind of how this is going to work, right? So every time that the user selects one of these, we're going to do something. And we are also going to add here an else command, because of course we want to handle the case when the user says something that is not, or gives a command that isn't appropriate, right? So here I'm going to say print no valid command, and that is simply going to be another function that I will create. I don't need that at the very end. So we've covered most of our bases, right? Before I start creating those definitions, I actually want to set up some other stuff, right? So I want to set up what happens at the very beginning, because of course our game doesn't really make sense if we do these functions one by one. I kind of want to set up all this scaffolding first. And I'm going to import this welcome text that I got with the starter code. So this welcome text basically just introduces the user to what we're doing. And then I'm going to print that right before I start my game. I'm going to say print welcome text, which is a function, and I'm just going to print a blank space right beneath it so I can get like a new line. That'll be very useful. And then finally, the last thing I think I want to do, there's two things I want to do right before I check and see what the user actually has done. So when they enter something, obviously I want to check that. But one thing I want to do is I want a check status function right here. So this check status function, and how we're going to create it is we're going to say that this function is a check to see if the user has won or lost. And so we're going to leave that right as it is, and we're going to create that function later. But it's basically going to go through every single turn and say, okay, have they won? Have they lost because they ran out of food, because they ran out of health, or whatever it may be. I also, of course, need to actually take in the user command. And of course, we use our handy and trusty input function. And I'm going to say, what would you like to do? And then simply because I am too lazy to type it out, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste it from my notes. And I'm going to paste a list of our commands. So this will actually tell the user, here's what you can do. What would you like to do, right? In addition to this, I think I have most of the basic parts. We want to check status. We want to set the user command to their input. And for now, that's pretty much it. That's going to be how we set up the functions. And the next part of this video will actually show setting up some of these functions, trying to set up the more important ones. And we'll also get into the global variables as well. And I'll show you how I'm using those in my code and my interpretation of this project. Now that we've got the main scaffolding of our project set up, what we want to do is actually create each one of these functions that I've set up here is in check status, and then handle travel, handle rest, handle hunt, and so on and so on. As you're going to see as we go through, there's a lot that we have not set up in this project. And of course, we can still be adding potentially to this main gain loop down here. It may not be quite done yet. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start with maybe the most simple commands first. So here I'm going to write def, and I'm going to say print no valid. And instead of doing that, I'm going to copy this. So here I'm setting up just a definition of basically what we want to tell the user when they haven't put in a valid command. When I say print, the command you have entered is not recognized. Please enter a new command. And then I'm also going to do the same thing I'm doing right down here, where I'm just going to say, what would you like to do? And then of course, the user can select from these options. So let's put that right there, add a W, and then for the sake of good grammar, capitalize this as well. Now we have a little bit of a better setup, right? So this is what's going to print out when the user does not input a valid command, and our if statements down here do not check it. And you can see now that our function has no longer got the red text like all these other ones do, right? So that allows us to actually start getting some things done programmatically. The next function that I want to use, there's a lot of different functions, is one that's going to be a little bit important later on that we don't even have down here. And this is actually the def add day function. So def add day is a function, and it's specified in the instructions for this project. What we're trying to do is basically one, increment the day. So we want to add a day in this function as it insinuates. And we also want to apply the sort of effects of each day. So you might lose a little bit of food each day, you might lose a little bit of health each day, and we want to create that inside of this function. Now here is where we're actually going to get into some of our different variables and constants that we're going to need for this project. So to do that, what I did in my code, and what I would suggest to do, is set up areas up here for our constants, and then another area for our model variables, which are game status variables, but we're just calling them models, which is a little bit of a fancier term. So here, I'm going to set up a variable called day, and that I'm going to start at 1, and I'm going to set up a month variable, which I'm going to start at 3, and then I'm also going to put I want to put a year module, and that'll come in handy, and I'm going to leave year as 0. when I was writing my code, I found that the year is going to be very important to say what happens when we go past December. One of the prompts that we have is that if the user goes past December, they officially have lost. So of course, January of the second year, they've officially lost, and I've kind of set that up using a year variable. You can do that differently if you'd like. I'm also going to keep that pretty much as it is for now. I'm going to bring these ones up, and then I'm going to hit enter. And I want to bring this code, and I'm just doing some housekeeping right here. So that happens right before. So now the add day function, what happens here? There's a couple of different things that happen. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say global, and I'm going to say day, global month, global year. And this is so that our code recognizes these as global variables that we want to change and not just a localized variable. So I'm going to create my logic like this. I need three things. I need to check if the day is 28 or greater, and if the month has only 28 days, like February, I would change the date. If it's 30 and the month has 30 days, I will change it to the next month, and so on and so on. I have a couple of constants with which to do that. Then I'm going to go ahead and copy over to save us some time. You can see here I have a constant, and I'm using that capitalized underscore notation to say that the first month, the third, and so on are all months with 31 days. Months with 30 days are right here, and months with 28 days are right here. And the way that I've decided to write my code is with a couple of if statements. So let's go right here, and let's say if day is greater than or equal to 28, and month with 28 days, right? I want to say day is equal to 1, and month is equal to plus equals 1. Additionally, I also want to make sure I'm actually incrementing the day each time. So I'm going to say day is equal to plus equals 1. Now, if I come down here, I can copy this and use it almost identically. So I'll say if the month is within 30 days, that's our constant we defined up here, right? So I'm saying if the month number is 4 is within 30 days, like April, and we're on the 30th day, the next day is going to be 1, and the month is going to be the next month over. So here I will go ahead and say day, of course, is equal to 1, and month is equal to plus equals 1. Same thing as before. We just want to make sure we're catching it appropriately. I'm also going to say if day, and of course I can just copy and paste, is actually 31. And in doing so, I've actually caught an error up here. They should be 30. And this is going to be 31 days. I'm setting that up exactly like we have the last two. And then finally, the last thing that I want to check is this. I'm going to say if month is greater than 12. So if all those loops have executed and my month is 13, I'm going to make the month is equal to 1. Day is equal to 1 as well, and year is equal to 1 as well. So we go from year 0 to year 1. Just double check and make sure my year starts at 0. Another thing is I also want to make sure these start as else ifs. So I want this to be an else if, and this to be an else if, because theoretically I want these three to be exclusive. I don't want one to run and then the others to potentially run. So I'm just going to keep them as else ifs. And then I'm also going to make this if month is greater than 12 as kind of separate outside that, because theoretically one of these, and it'll be whichever one, it'll be this one, will run for December. It'll say December has 31 days. We're going to make the month 13 and the day 1. And then this month is going to just make sure that's double changed back to what I have it before. Now, I think that's going to be all for this video, so please do look to the next part to continue this project. One thing I do want to note is just keep in mind these functions can change. So I know that I'm not done with the add day function because I've written this code before. I know that I'm going to add a few things, but right now they don't make sense because I haven't really written those functions. So I wanted to keep that a little bit separate and want to put in code that doesn't make sense if you're working on this for the first time. So what we're going to be adding is up here, we'll be saying like, create degenerative effects. So we'll create a variable later on, and it'll be food, and food will be able to minus equal 50 because we take 50 food off each day, right? But since we haven't got that function, I'm going to go ahead and keep that out. And that is all for this part. Thank you for tuning in very much, and I look forward to seeing you in part 2.